Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. Queen Elizabeth II was a servant to the United Kingdoms for 70 years, making her its longest reigning monarch, surpassing her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. While Queen Victoria oversaw the expansion of the UK's reach across the globe, Queen Elizabeth's reign oversaw something quite different in a time of decolonization, social strife, Cold War, and technological revolutions. The Queen was considered by many to be the one thread upholding the British monarchy, yet strengthening it in ways only she could have. Her passing leaves many in mourning, including myself, and sparked a long chain of protocol, culminating in the accession of King Charles III. A bittersweet moment, yet questions surrounding the future of the Crown's influence remain persistent around the world. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. I am Kirsten Cullenberg, Director of Programs at the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth. Today, we will hear from Lord Mark Sedwill, Baron Sedwill of Sherborne, moderated by the Council's President and CEO, Liz Girlsford. I want to extend a special thanks to several people, including our community partners across the Metroplex and the country, especially our friends at the Bush Institute's 43 Club. Very welcome to join us today. I'd also like to thank our member of the World Affairs Council Board of Directors, Mike Anderson, who worked alongside Lord Sedwill for many years in the British government. Mike was able to connect us with Lord Sedwill today for this opportunity, and we thank him for all he does for our council. Regardless of where you live in the US, please consider becoming a member of the World Affairs Council. There are over 90 chapters of World Affairs Councils across the nation, building a more informed citizenry in each city and engaging each other in important conversations. And now to introduce our guest speaker and our moderator today. Many of you know Liz Girlsford, who served as the president and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Dallas-Fort Worth since February of 2021, having been previously with the World Affairs Councils of America, based in Washington, D.C. Her internationally focused career began with her experiences living and teaching in Japan and have included work with USAID and the USDA's Food for Progress program. Liz serves on several boards across DFW, as well as a mentor to women seeking careers in foreign policy. She holds an MPA in Global Policy from the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School and a BA in Media Arts from the University of South Carolina. Lord Mark Sedwill, who joins us today, is a longtime British diplomat, member of the House of Lords and civil servant who has served as Cabinet Secretary to Prime Ministers Theresa May and Boris Johnson. The head of the Home Civil Service from 2018 to 2020 and served as National Security Advisor for the United Kingdom. He was previously the UK's ambassador to Afghanistan, NATO Senior Civilian Representative in Afghanistan, and Permanent Secretary at the Home Office. Educated at St. Andrews and Oxford Universities, Lord Sedwill is a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and of the Institute Directors. He has received several awards and honors for national and international public service and is currently Senior Independent Director and Deputy Chair of Lloyd's of London. It's an honor to have him join us today, as there are few voices more qualified to speak with us on the impact of Queen Elizabeth's passing and the international implications yet to come. Thank you very much for being with us. I want to just quickly say that there may be some connection issues today, but we're going to work through them. I know Liz will guide us as a professional, and I look forward to a fascinating conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Liz, I pass it to you.
Thank you, Kirsten, and Lord Sedwill, thank you so much for joining us. I know how incredibly busy your schedule is, so we appreciate your time and thank you. I also want to start by offering our deepest sympathies and best wishes for what will come in your country and the United Kingdom. And I want to echo what Kirsten said. You are the perfect person to speak with, and we thank our board member, the fabulous Mike Anderson, for helping facilitate this meeting today. This program is part of our real-time report. It's our newest series that we've created to give you real-time analysis on what's going on in the world with breaking news. And like I said, you are a perfect person. So thank you, Lord Sedwill, for being with us. I want to kick us off here. There's a lot to unpack. And so I want to start us off quickly and help us understand here in the United States, how does your former office in the UK, the Home Civil Service, work with the Queen and the monarchy? And if you can lead into what was it like working with the Queen? And what is she like? What was she like?
Well, let's thank you very much. I apologise if the connection issues disrupt our conversation. I'm coming to you from the flagship of the Royal Navy, which is in New York Harbour, just next to the Statue of Liberty.
So we are having some connection issues. I believe he's in the United States right now and perhaps could be coming in from an office with some connection issues. Lord Sedwill, here you are. You are breaking up a bit. I wonder if you may go to another office or possibly even outside. We'll take you there also.
Let's try that. I'll try outside. It's quite windy, so there may be noise out there, but let's just give that a shot.
Let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. So as everyone knows, the Queen passed on Thursday, September 8th, 2 days after Prime Minister Liz Truss took over. On Tuesday, September 6th, she became official that day. It looks like we've got him outside, so we'll see if we can make this work. Lord Sedwill, we see you perfectly. Your sound is a little choppy still. So he is on a warship. Still a little choppy. Thanks for bearing with us, everyone. He's on a, yeah.
We'll do our best, I think, with the sound. If the sound goes, I'll switch the video off.
That sounds great.
That works, Liz.
We
actually apologize for that, but it's
no.
Just the nature of being on a warship.
Absolutely, we understand. Well, I don't know if we quite understand perfectly, but we understand your situation, and now we see and hear you perfectly. So let me repeat that question, and we'll go from there. And thanks again for everyone bearing with us. So help us understand in the United States, because obviously we have a different government, and we don't have the monarchy. So how did your former office, the Home Civil Service, work with the Queen and the monarchy? And what was your time like with the Queen specifically, and what was she like in real life?
So I think I perhaps make 2 or 3 points, Liz, and thank you very much for your condolences, by the way. I think one of the most touching things for us in the UK was the way that the world shared in our loss of the Queen, and it was remarkable to see President Biden, very unusually, coming to her funeral. So we're very, very grateful for the support and solidarity that's been shown, and His Majesty the King has said that as well. The Queen in private was very much like the Queen you saw in public. Thoughtful, always asking really pointed and intelligent questions, very courteous, and seeking to get the best out of people. I think she realized that all of us, no matter how senior or experienced we were slightly nervous around her. She'd been, her first prime minister was Winston Churchill. She'd seen so much of history. She'd met every US president, I think, with one exception, since Harry Truman. And so she was always very gracious in trying to put people at their ease around her in order to try and get the best from them. The system we have in the UK, though, is very different to the constitutional position in the US. It is a deliberate division between the head of state, the Queen, and now His Majesty the King, and the head of government, the Prime Minister. And I think what that means is that the focus of loyalty, whether it's of the armed forces, the civil service, or indeed the public service as a whole, is to the crown. That's the person to whom we swear our oath of allegiance. I took a new one in the House of Lords only a few days after the death of the Queen, to His Majesty the King. So there is that sense that we're working for someone who sits above politics and represents the nation and indeed the Commonwealth as a whole. And I think one of the most interesting comments one of our constitutional scholars wrote about the monarchy was it's not about, it's the crucial thing is it's not about the power the monarch exercises, it's about the power the monarch denies. It denies to politicians the ability to turn that natural loyalty to the head of state to personal political advantage, which in presidential systems, not only in the United States, but elsewhere too, one seen it in France and other places, because those two roles are combined, you can have kind of the imperial presidency. And that can't happen in the UK because the position of the monarch as the focus of national loyalty
You are going in and out a little bit. We hear you for large parts, and then you are a little bit. It might just be the wind.
Yeah, it might be. I'm standing still, so hopefully the signal is.
The signal is good.
Is okay. Yeah.
The signal is good.
Let me just see if I can move slightly out of the wind.
Oh, and we see that beautiful scene behind you too.
There you go.
What a scene. It's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous day out.
It is indeed.
Oh,
so let's try that. Is that better?
yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. I am sorry about this. It's it is weird to be doing this on a mobile phone standing outside on what is supposed to be the most connected warship in history.
Well, I'll tell you this. It's quite apparent that you have had a very long career in government and you are an utter professional with how you are handling this. So I appreciate your
most welcome
and your perseverance. So thank you. So, well, thank you for that. And most recently, you worked under both Prime Ministers, Theresa May and then Boris Johnson, and you stepped down during Boris Johnson's term. What were they like? And obviously, they were from different ends of the spectrum there, but tell us a little bit about what they were like to work for. What were their personalities like, and how did they differ?
Well, they're very different personalities, obviously. And again, I think what is striking about them is that their public personas are very similar, are basically the same as their private personas. So what you would have seen in public of the two of them, the different kinds of personalities, is exactly what we used to see in private as well. They're both sort of authentic in that sense. I think what is really striking about the job of Prime Minister, almost unlike any other job in government, and I think it's true of the presidency of the United States as well, is that you can shape the way of exercising that job to the personality in it. If you're the foreign minister, the secretary of state in the US, or you're running the Department for Homeland Security or whatever, you have very clear responsibilities, clear boundaries, and the way you operate is essentially pretty well defined for you. But if you're the head of government, you can operate in very different ways. And so we adapt the government machine to the personality of the Prime Minister. And so, if you just to use a parallel in the United States, if you think of President Reagan, for example, a very successful US president, his way of operating as the great communicator was to set the strategic direction, communicate it to the American people, but pick a really strong team of people around him as his chief of staff and in his cabinet, whom he then, he wasn't a details man. He let them then get on with it as long as he was confident they were pursuing his strategic direction. You've had other presidents, President Clinton, for example, who was much more involved in all of the detail, or President Obama, much more involved in all of the detail. And the same is true of British prime ministers, that they can be sort of one or the other, if you like, a Reagan or a Thatcher, if one thinks of those two leaders who got on very well but had very different styles. And Boris Johnson was probably more, his style, including when he was mayor of London, was more akin to the Reagan style, fantastic political communicator, and setting strategic direction. Theresa May's style, probably again more like a Clinton, a Bill Clinton, or or a Margaret Thatcher, very focused on the detail of government.
You can almost see that in the way that with the way that the prime ministers both seemed in their energy and the image that they projected. You could feel that that's how they would be. That's really interesting. So just before the Queen's passing, new Prime Minister Liz Truss was in the chamber, the House of Commons chamber, and she was interrupted in her announcement of an energy price freeze. The Commons had never been interrupted like this before, and it was to hear news of the Queen's health. So can you speak to what the atmosphere was like in the UK days before the Queen's passing?
Yeah, it was, of course, the last duty the Queen performed, and she was performing her duties right up until the end. That was really what defined her as a public servant. Was one of those constitutional duties that only the monarch can perform, and that is seeing the conclusion of Boris Johnson's premiership and appointing Liz Truss as his successor. Although the choice of prime minister rests in the party political system, the formality is that the monarch, as head of state, actually appoints the prime minister. And so that very last photograph we saw of the Queen, smiling but looking frail, was of her appointing Liz Truss to the premiership from her summer.
We've got a little bit of freeze here. We'll wait this out a moment and see if he comes back in a second. We are incredibly lucky to have this speaker with us. We know how busy his schedule was as we tried to schedule this, and we are very grateful to him. He mentioned the photo of when the Queen actually appointed and it became official for the Prime Minister Truss to take over as Prime Minister. And if any of you have seen the photo, I'm sure most, or if not everyone has, the Queen almost looked like she was in perfect health, and she did seem a little frail, but it was shocking to me, at least, when those photos emerged, how healthy she actually seemed. So we're going to give it a moment, and everyone, thank you very much for bearing with us. We've got him back here. Let's see. You are on mute, but we can see you perfectly.
Yeah, I have 5G reception in New York Harbor, but it does seem to be cutting out. Anyway, we'll keep going. Yeah, so I think the point I was really making was that no one, in a sense, was surprised, because the Queen had been in fragile health for some while, and she was 96 years old, but everybody was stunned. And that was definitely the case the day after. I was in the House of Lords that day when people were making speeches to pay tribute to her. All normal business was suspended, and the sense of shock, of that emotional sense of loss, was palpable.
So how may Prime Minister Truss's government, or governance rather, be impacted or changed because of the Queen's passing? Will she
So I think one of the things that the late Queen was very careful to do was never to get drawn into the political debate. I mean, it is remarkable when you think she was one of the most prominent people in the world for 70 years, and no one knew what she thought. And even those who did, who got an insight into it in private, would never disclose that. We always maintained her confidence, and that is the strength of a constitutional monarchy. That she was very, very careful not to be drawn into the political debate or allow her views to be communicated. And the new king, King Charles III, has made clear that he will follow that model as well. And so the new government in the UK has had quite a controversial start with launching some quite radical changes to economic policy. But no one in the UK that controversy is very much within the political arena, and no one in the UK is suggesting that the presence of the new king is related to that at all. He sits, as his mother did, above the political contest.
We are in such an unprecedented time as adults working in our careers, either in government or the private sector, or whatever it may be. It seems that because it's an unprecedented time, that there is an opportunity to have behaviors impacted and changed. So it's interesting that you feel that there won't really be much of one. Do you see any impacts, immediate impacts in the UK? Maybe not through Prime Minister Truss, but perhaps through the lens of your fellow countrymen, or perhaps through other departments and offices of the government?
So I think what is striking is and this is something the Queen, I think, prepared for quite carefully, was to try to ensure that the line of succession was clear, that the role of the King and the Queen Consort the transition would be very smooth. We've had the appointment immediately on his accession of his son, Prince William, as Prince of Wales, to succeed King Charles, who was Prince of Wales before. And so that sense of continuity of the institution, even though we've lost a great queen, but the sense of the continuity of the institution was something she worked very hard to preserve, and did so in quite important ways through her various jubilees: the Golden Jubilee, her 50 years, this Diamond Jubilee 60, and the Platinum Jubilee 70 years, where she was consciously bringing King Charles alongside her to show that the institution of the monarchy was in good hands when she passed and when it was handed on. He's toured the UK. He's toured all 4 nations of the UK. One of the things that was a genuine innovation is, although the forms of accession are hundreds of years old, the oath that he swears goes back to the Glorious Revolution of 1688 and before. It was televised for the first time. He made an address only 24 hours after the late Queen's passing to the nation, and that had never been done before either. And so there was a conscious attempt by the King to reach out to the nation, to essentially introduce himself to us as King. We've known him for a long time, of course. He's the longest serving Prince of Wales in history, for the same reason as his mother was the longest serving Queen. But he was reintroducing himself to us as King. And I think that transition has gone very smoothly, and it's important to the institution of the monarchy that, of course, it does so.
So you think he will be widely accepted by other leaders, and most specifically, or perhaps most importantly, other countries in the Commonwealth? There's over 50 of them. There's 14 realms. You think he will be widely accepted by them also? And let me just follow on to that question do you think there will be any type of reduction of visibility in the monarch now that King Charles is installed?
So I don't think there'll be any reduction in visibility. In a sense, actually, perhaps on the contrary. For the last few years, the late Queen, for example, was not making long-haul trips. And so, as Prince of Wales, King Charles would represent her at, for example, Commonwealth summits if they were the other side of the world. Whereas he will, of course, be able to do that for himself. And so, at least in this phase, I think you'll see the King very much being the sole representative of the monarchy, rather than, as happened in Queen Elizabeth's later years, her essentially sharing some of that with him as her son. I mean, in terms of the Commonwealth, several countries, including those which are realms, have for some time considered whether or not it is appropriate for them to maintain a head of state who resides outside their own country. This has been a question in Australia in the past, certainly a question in some of the Caribbean nations. And the UK and certainly the Queen and now King Charles have always taken the view that these are decisions for these countries. Of course, we hope that they would remain within the Commonwealth, within that family of nations. But whether they want to retain the monarch as the head of state or whether they want to go to a different constitutional arrangement, we've always taken the view is very much a matter for them, because the democratic values that underpin a constitutional monarchy, of course, apply everywhere else as well as in the UK.
We are talking with Lord Mark Sedwill, former head of the Home Civil Service in the UK, and we are talking about the Queen's passing and the impact that it has around the world. We have a Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. Please do submit your questions and I will weave those in and out of this conversation as we go on. What are some of, Commonwealth aside, your realm countries of 14 aside, what are some of the other short-term impacts that you may see coming with the Queen's passing in this transition that's happened? And follow that, please, with medium or long-term impacts that you may see.
I think the clear objective of the late Queen and of the new King is that that impact is absolutely minimized, that the institution of the monarchy is continuous. What happens on the death of a monarch is instantaneous. It's known as, one breathes out, the other breathes in. And the traditional form of words on the death of a monarch is the Queen is dead, long live the King, or the King is dead, long live the King, long live the new King. It's an immediate passage. And as I said, she worked very hard to try to ensure that there would be a smooth transition to King Charles. Now, he will decide how he wants to lead the institution of the monarchy. There's been speculation about whether he will make some changes to the number of members of his family that are active working royals, as they're known, whether he'll want to streamline. There's been lots of questions around that, but those are, he's already said that he will have to reduce his personal involvement with some of the charities and other organisations he supported when he was Prince of Wales, because as King he now has other duties, and then there'll be questions for those institutions about who, for example, becomes their new royal patron. So one very big charity in the UK, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, which I'm a trustee of, and that's their job. They essentially save lives at sea. They run the lifeboat service as a charity in the UK, working alongside the Coast Guard and others to save lives at sea and reduce drowning. The Queen, the late Queen, was the RNLI's patron. Many regiments and military institutions had the Queen as their patron or as their colonel-in-chief, and so the new King will need to decide how to distribute those, which ones he wants to take on himself, and how to distribute those. But I think she would have hoped, and he will hope, that actually there won't be a significant impact on the life of the nation, that the institution of the monarchy is a stabilizing factor, is the focus of loyalty, and that will remain. And so I think particularly now, it's a remarkable inflection point to have a change of government and a change of head of government and a change of head of state at the same time. I don't think that's happened certainly in the last couple of 100 years. And so the sense that we've had a shift of direction in the UK, we shouldn't really associate that with the King's accession. It's much more about the change of government and the new policies of the new Prime Minister.
Yeah. Thank you. There are a couple of questions, and I actually had a question about this too. So I'm going to round up their questions that is along the same lines of mine. And that is that the Queen appeared particularly adept at holding the Commonwealth together and holding these 14 realms together. Are there particular bonds that may be stronger or will remain strong with the King? And then are there bonds that may become less strong in the King's time?
Difficult to say, really. I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate, as you've implied through the question, the sense of personal loyalty to Queen Elizabeth herself. She had devoted her life to service ever since that famous broadcast from South Africa when she was 21, and she was devoted to the Commonwealth. The King is too, and so he has represented the Queen at Commonwealth summits recently, and it was with unanimous agreement of the heads of government of the Commonwealth a few years ago that on her passing he would become head of the Commonwealth as well, because we needed, the Commonwealth is essentially quite a democratic institution. There are very small states in it, and of course very large states like India, and all of them agreed that the head of the Commonwealth should become that role should pass to King Charles on his accession. But of course, families evolve, networks change. We've already touched on whether the constitutional position in some of the nations might change, and the Commonwealth, like any institution, needs to adapt to the modern era. I think one of the areas that we've all hoped, and I'm sure the King would hope, the Commonwealth can play an important role in, given the number of very small, including small island states there are in the Commonwealth, is in promoting their interests as we tackle the challenge of climate change, because they will be more seriously affected if there are if the sea levels rise and if there is more volatility in the world climate than European nations or North America. And the Commonwealth is an institution which gives some of those small nations a voice. And I'm sure the King, he's been very focused on environmental issues throughout his life, and I'm sure he would want the Commonwealth to, for example, to play an active role in representing the interests of those members.
Do you see any of the Commonwealth countries at risk of breaking away now in the near term?
Well, one or two have over the years, and then re-entered. Pakistan has been out.
And by the way, that risk, that wind is coming up again, just so you know. That
yeah,
that's.
I mean, the breeze is actually getting stronger here. So I will
that's
try,
good where you are. That's good where you are.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Try to keep the microphone out of it. Yeah, the breeze is definitely getting stronger out here. If I drop the phone, it's because my hand is frozen. We have had countries that have left the Commonwealth, sometimes temporarily. South Africa was outside the Commonwealth for the whole of the apartheid era. Pakistan has been out and re-entered, Zimbabwe, etc. But actually, the Commonwealth has actually expanded over the past few years, and including some nations have joined that were never part of the British Empire. The Commonwealth essentially was the organisation that helped manage that transition as we went through the decolonisation in the decades after World War II, and maintained the cultural links between Commonwealth nations after once the political links were essentially changed with independence for many Commonwealth countries. But countries that were never part of that institution have actually joined the Commonwealth because they value the cultural links, the people-to-people links. They like participating in the Commonwealth Games, which is the biggest sporting event other than the Olympics. And so actually, I think the Commonwealth is in pretty good shape.
So let me expand on that question and then bring in Brexit that happened. And we all know about Brexit. And so those are two very large geopolitical transitions. And so if there was to be a Commonwealth country that broke away, or and now that Brexit has happened, what are some of the economic impacts that may impact how the UK contributes to the global order or the world at large?
Well, I think the Commonwealth is not an economic institution. There has been talk sometimes of whether we should try and create a Commonwealth free trade agreement, but the Commonwealth actually is much more as a network and cultural organisation nowadays that tries to deal with some of those broader challenges rather than the sort of hard governance issues of security and economics. So I don't think the Commonwealth is likely in the near future to really affect the global economic order. Of course, as you say, we've been through Brexit, and that's obviously a very significant change in our economic relations with our neighbours here in the European continent. We have a free trade agreement with the EU, which obviously is different to the previous system when we were part of the European single market. And actually, we're seeking to try and reduce some of the frictions that have arisen during that transition. And the new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, was our Trade Secretary for several years and is very focused on trying to secure more free trade agreements with countries elsewhere in the world, which we couldn't do as part of the EU because those had to be negotiated by the EU. So we are seeking to become a member of the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Free Trade Area, even though obviously, as your colleagues will know, we're not a Pacific nation geographically, but we do an awful lot of trade with the Pacific and have many interests there, including through the Commonwealth. We have been negotiating a free trade agreement with the United States. We're negotiating one with India. And so what we're seeking to do now that Brexit has been implemented is actually have a wider range of free trade agreements with other countries in the world. We have one agreed with Australia, for example, a very important Commonwealth partner. So it's a big change for us, a big change in orientation, but one which we're clearly seeking to exploit the benefits of having that freedom to follow our own path.
Here's a question from the audience. Ms. Dunn, do you think King Charles will remain in office until death or consider stepping down to give a younger leader the opportunity to serve?
I think, I mean, of course, I don't know. This would be very much in the King's own mind. And there have been examples elsewhere of constitutional monarchies in Japan, in Spain, elsewhere, where that model has been followed and the monarch has retired and it's been passed on. The Queen herself, I think, set the example that she was determined to serve the nation for the whole of her life, and the King has taken the same oath. And so my expectation is that he sees it in the same way, but it would be wrong for me to speculate.
Here is another question from our audience. As former national security advisor, do you feel the UK's adversaries view this as a vulnerable time for your government? And what concerns do you have?
Well, I think it would be a mistake for our adversaries to see it that way, because I think this is one of the benefits of a constitutional monarchy. You don't get that sense of disruption, the deliberate passing of the baton, the profile that the late Queen gave to the King when he was her heir apparent as Prince of Wales means that the transition is deliberately smooth, and you don't get that sense of a disruption you get, for example, when a US administration changes, particularly when that change is disputed, as it was last time, and even a change of government, because you have the institution of the monarchy sitting above it. Even a change of government, and the new government is pursuing some quite sharply different economic policies to their predecessors, but even a change of government, therefore, it probably feels less dramatic to us than sometimes it might do in a presidential system. And the new government's commitment, for example, to Ukraine, to NATO, to our relationship with the United States. The reason I'm on this carrier is I'm chairing a thing called the Atlantic Future Forum, which is a US-UK security conference, and we've just had Eric Schmidt here this morning and many members of the US administration. The new government's commitment to those alliances and to standing fast against our adversaries, notably, of course, Russia's aggression in Ukraine, is as strong as as their predecessors. And so I think any of our adversaries would be making a mistake if they think this is a moment to exploit. Actually, shows the strength of our institutions. I think the smoothness of this transition.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Russia and Ukraine, because I had a question about that, and you alluded to this just a few moments ago, but if you can expand on it, do you feel, due to Brexit, do you feel that the UK has felt a little left out of coordination or involvement in the Ukraine-Russia war, or even unprotected in some way due to that, or does it feel liberated? Do you all?
I think actually, in a sense, it's definitely we don't feel unprotected. Of course, we're one of the two nuclear weapon states in Western Europe, the UK and France, and we provide part of NATO's deterrent against the Russian nuclear weapons, alongside the United States and the US nuclear umbrella. And actually, we've been central to the Allied effort in Ukraine. The previous Prime Minister and this one have played a very powerful leadership role, I think, and people have paid tribute to that, including from the US administration, to the role that we've played in Ukraine. So I don't think we felt left out at all. If anything, we've been leaning in very hard. And let's not forget, Brexit was leaving the EU, but we remain the second biggest military power in NATO and Europe's biggest military power in NATO, and have been central to that effort.
Let's change gears just a little bit and ask a little bit more on the cultural front. How does an entire culture, and this is a guest from our audience, how does an entire culture adjust to the King's reign after 70 years of the Queen's rule? What is the cultural impact there?
Well, I think the answer to that is we won't know probably for several years, because historians will have to judge how significant this was. This transition was, her reign was, for the reasons you set out at the beginning, she oversaw a very important transition in Britain's place in the world from our position in the immediate post-World War II years to this first quarter of the 21st century. And I think what will really determine the cultural impact is what happens over the next 20-25 years as well. As I said, I think for the monarch himself, and for the institution, for the king himself and the institution of the monarchy, that sense of continuity, passing of the torch to a new generation very smoothly, was something that the Queen, the late Queen herself, worked very hard to ensure, and I'm sure the King will do the same. We've seen in his early statements, as I said earlier, in the appointing Prince William as immediately as Prince of Wales, taking over the role that King Charles performed before, that sense that there is another, there is someone else who will also take up the torch, let's hope in many years' time. And his son, George, 9 years old, Prince George of Wales, 9 years old, again, will take up the torch after that. And there have been some iconic images on the balconies or in Buckingham Palace of the four generations of the late Queen, the King, Prince William and Prince George, trying to demonstrate that this institution sits at the core of the British nation and will provide that sense of continuity and stability.
Another question is, can you share how intricate the protocol was in place as the government prepared for the Queen's passing, from Parliament to the royal funeral services to the BBC? How involved were you in preparing for that eventuality?
So when I was doing my last job in government, when I was cabinet secretary, we had a contingency plan. I mean, obviously, one knows that at some point this was going to happen. We're all mortal. Called London Bridge, and it was a very thorough plan of all of the elements that would have to be put in place on the death of Her Majesty and for the accession of King Charles. We had other subsidiary plans. So there was one called Forth Bridge, which we put in place when the Duke of Edinburgh died, and there are other contingency plans. And so everything was very carefully prepared beforehand, including how to handle the situation if, as she did, the Queen passed when she was in Scotland at Balmoral, or if it had happened when she was overseas and so on. So we went through those plans quite carefully over many years and refined them and agreed them, of course, with the most important person. And they very much put their stamp. But there were then then some adjustments to meet the demands of the time. I think the one thing we never knew was how many people would want to turn out and pay their respects. So we had a range of numbers in mind, and we're preparing all the logistic things one needs to do, transport and support for people who wanted to pay their respects, go to the lying in state, attend the state funeral, be along the route and all the rest of it. And the numbers, I think, even exceeded the highest numbers that we had prepared for. So there were some adjustments made at the last minute to allow more people to see the late Queen's coffin and the hearse as it went past and pay their respects and so on. But the fundamental plans have been ones that she had approved and had been in place for many years.
You know, I was speaking to some British friends after the Queen passed, and I think some of them were a little surprised at how emotional they were and how impacted they felt they were in the days that followed. I'll tell you from my personal point of view, I always admired the Queen for, no matter what her age was or how busy her schedule was, she always handled her office with the utmost decorum and carried out her duties till the very end. And that is an inspiration to me as a woman leader. And I know that's been inspiring for many around the world as well. Were you surprised with how you felt?
I think there were moments where I find even now talking about it quite difficult. That surprised me that still weeks later, I find myself quite moved talking about it, thinking about
it. Well, I want to end with this question, and it is, how will the Queen be remembered, and how can we honor her legacy in the future?
I think she will be remembered. I once said this of her actually at an event she attended, and she gave me a big smile, so I'm assuming that she liked it. And the cheers nearly took the roof off when I just called her the nation's greatest public servant. And she, at her Platinum Jubilee, wrote a letter.
We have a freeze. We'll give it a moment and see if he comes back. I know that the world will be honoring her legacy for a long time to come. And we'll see what Lord Sedwill has to say about this if he comes back. And if not, we will bid you farewell. Thank you for bearing with us. We'll give it another moment, but thank you for bearing with us through this difficult connectivity issue today. You would think on a warship that we would be more connected than ever, and often we are in our world, and for better or worse in our schedules. So we have him off camera now. We'll give it another minute. He's in New York, in the harbor there. And here we are. We have him back on camera and on mute once more. You're on mute, and we'll hear your last segment here.
There we go. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Just at the crucial question. So how will she be? I think she will be remembered that way. She wrote this letter on her Platinum Jubilee to the nation, and formally we're all her subjects. We're citizens, but we're subjects of the monarch. And she signed it, "Your servant, Elizabeth." I think that's how she be remembered.
That is remarkable. It's remarkable. Well, Lord Sedwill, thank you. Like I said, when we started this and you were having connectivity issues, it is quite obvious you've been in the government for many years. You are a total professional. Thank you for joining us truly in your busy schedule, and good luck with your conference there and in New York. We wish you the very, very best in your country. And like I said in the beginning, offer our deepest condolences for this transition. But thank you again for your time, and we wish you
well, thank you. And I'll leave you therefore with the image I'm now looking at in New York Harbor. And what a pleasure it's been to talk to you. And thank you for your time, and thank the audience for their questions. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We wish you farewell. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
All the